Ever find yourself suffering from imposter syndrome? It's pretty common, especially with women. And today I'm going to share with you a few strategies when that doubt starts to creep in and that imposter syndrome starts to hijack your brain. Hey everybody, Angelique here, corporatecrunchy.com, where I love to talk about reselling, thrifting, consignment, and conscious fashion. Today's video, I wanted to talk about imposter syndrome. And the reason I wanted to talk about this today was because this is something I've been dealing with a little bit myself personally. So I know that it's very common, especially for women, to have feelings of imposter syndrome. And if it's the first time you're hearing about imposter syndrome, basically, it's a feeling that you have that you are not as competent as others perceive you to be. Maybe you attribute your success to external factors such as luck or good timing, but not necessarily on your own skill or your own value. And imposter syndrome is very common, like I said, especially in women, although it does happen to men as well. There's a few strategies that you can apply when you start to feel that doubt creep in and you start to feel like an imposter. And here's some things you can do to kind of help combat that. Okay, so if you're watching this video, you're probably a reseller, which means that you have your own small business. And a lot of us, I will talk about myself personally. I started this as kind of a hobby and it, kind of snowballed into a real business, which is true of a lot of folks who are in the reselling business. And that can, all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, I'm like this grown-up business owner now. What happened? How did I get here? So it's not that uncommon to have that imposter syndrome. Okay, so here's the first strategy when you feel the imposter syndrome starting to creep in. The first thing that you can do to kind of get past it is to phone a friend/fan. So think about somebody who's a fan of yours. It could be your best friend, it could be your spouse, it could be a client who really, really appreciates you. Give them a call or a text and just say, hey, I'm really struggling right now. I'm having a lot of doubts. What is it that you see in me that you think makes me successful? Your best friend, your spouse, your best client, they will be happy to share with you what it is that they find that you do well. And I encourage you to write down what they say and keep maybe a little notebook, or if you have a journal, as kind of an affirmation anytime you start to feel that doubt creep in. Okay, tip number 2 for combating imposter syndrome is to think about who you serve. So we don't always get to meet or interact with our customers as online resellers. It's a virtual arrangement, right? So sometimes we might chat with them, chat this way, but we don't necessarily communicate verbally. But there might be some folks who you do communicate with that way. For example, if you are selling on consignment and you have consignment clients you're selling for, or maybe you have friends that you're selling for, think about how you serve them. And you can even ask them hey, what difference have I made in your life? And if you don't have folks like that you can ask, I suggest look through your feedback that you've gotten, whether it's you're selling on eBay or Poshmark. Ignore the negative comments. Everybody's got them. Don't worry about those, okay? Focus on the positive ones and really concentrate on oh, I really provide a valuable service and I've provided a valuable service to someone, and really focus on those things. Okay, tip number 3 for overcoming imposter syndrome is to just acknowledge the feeling. Just notice when it starts to creep in. I mentioned earlier in the video, I myself have had a little bit of that creeping in this week as I've been having to deal with kind of some, big girl business issues. And it's kind of that imposter syndrome, who am I to think that I can run this business? What was I thinking even starting this? This is getting to be way more complicated than I ever thought it was going to be. How do people even trust me to do this for them? So really just acknowledge okay, thank you for sharing, brain, and just acknowledge it. Say thank you for sharing, that little voice in your head, and then say, you know what? I can do this, and move past it. So it's kind of simple, but it's important that you acknowledge it, that you don't try to bury it, and then you try to overcome that. I know this lovely woman who I was in a coaching community with, and she had a great method for overcoming any kind of negative self-talk, and she called it how to be your own BFF. And she said, stop and think about whenever those negative thoughts start to creep in or that negative self-talk creeps in, just think to yourself, what would my best friend say? Would my best friend say, oh yeah, you're a screw up? Or would your best friend say, yeah, this is tough, but you know what? You've got this. You've done way harder things. You can do this too. Okay, so acknowledge the feeling, think about what your BFF would say, and then move on. Okay, I think we're on tip number 4 for overcoming imposter syndrome. Get off social media. Okay, I know it's ironic. We're on YouTube right now, but you have to be careful with social media. Social media is a very powerful tool for business. We all use it. It's necessary. Some people might argue it's not necessary. I think it's pretty necessary, but you have to be careful how you're engaging with social media, who you're following. You might see this other seller who's doing 6 figures and they're posting pictures, sending out 30 packages a day. And you're thinking, well, gosh, I sent out 5 packages today and I felt pretty good about that. Maybe I'm not that great after all. So be careful about those. Watching those kinds of or following those kinds of folks can have 2 results, right? It can either serve to inspire you or it can discourage you. So really notice when you see those kinds of posts of people who are way more successful than you might be right now. Just kind of notice, am I inspired by this or am I intimidated / demotivated by this? If it demotivates you, then don't follow those people. Maybe come back to them later. Maybe it's better to follow people who are kind of in the same stage of their business that you are. The other thing to remember is those big sellers, those people with these big businesses, they started small too. They probably started just like you did. But the overnight success is a myth, okay? It's a myth. It doesn't happen. It's a lot of hard work and time. So just remember that as well. They probably started very small and humble as well. Okay, last tip. Tip number 5 is tap into your stubbornness. So you may or may not be a stubborn person by nature, but when you start to feel the imposter syndrome creep in, be stubborn with yourself. Say, you know what? No. Just stop it, brain. No. I can do this. I'm okay. I am going to prove my own brain and my own negative self-talk wrong, and I can be successful and I can do this. Okay? So whatever that stubborn side of you looks like, tap into that to kind of help push past that imposter syndrome that you might be experiencing. Okay, so I hope that this was at least a little bit helpful. Feel free to drop a comment if you have any other strategies for overcoming imposter syndrome, or if you're someone who hasn't ever dealt with imposter syndrome, tell us what that's like too, because that's amazing and would love to know how to not have to deal with that. Thanks so much, corporatecrunchy.com. If you like this channel, if you like this video, like and subscribe. And again, drop a comment and let me know what you think. Thanks, everybody.